A quick introduction for the introduction-only presentation. This is a assignment I came up with for my students to get a little more practice in front of the classroom, but also to think about organization for their upcoming informative presentation. And an important thing about this also is that getting you guys used to writing and talking and presenting for people's ears versus for their eyes in a paper. Okay, so if we move on here. So parts of the assignment are, there's the specific purpose. Okay, there's the speech organizational pattern. There's the introduction, including the intention getter, the topic or thesis statement, the declaration of importance to the audience or an audience relations statement. Why should they be listening? A credibility statement for why you are credible to talk about this, and then a preview of the body of the speech. And then I have an extra thing down here, which is a transition, which is actually extra credit. Shh, don't tell anyone. Okay, so why this assignment again? I'm trying to get you to think about organizing your speech, thinking about what your main points for your speech should be. Now, you might change them around in order. You might come up with a different new point. You might have 4 and combine 2 of those to have only 3. This doesn't set them in stone for your upcoming informative speech. Okay, thinking about why your topic is important to the audience, and importantly, practicing speaking, your delivery, your eye contact, and gestures. Okay. So parts of the assignment, the specific purpose. This is an infinitive phrase that builds upon your general purpose to clearly indicate precisely what the goal of the given speech is. Again, a general purpose is something like to inform or to persuade or to entertain, which might be the 3 main speeches we end up doing. Okay. So for this one is, our infinitive thing to do, the general purpose is to inform. So your audience, you're going to inform them about a very specific realm of knowledge. For example, the history of NASA's shuttle program. Okay. Then there's a central idea statement. This is a statement that summarizes the speech's main points. And as this, I prefer one that summarizes. It's much like a thesis, but there are some difference because this is not, again, a paper. This is something very different. Okay, it is shorter. It's a declarative statement, not that 2 to 3 sentences you might have in a paper for an English class. It's inclusive. You can say things like, we will, or let's look at, or we will be discussing. Okay, and those things like that are inclusive because instead of saying, I'm going to talk to you, it's like, we're going to be looking at, we're going to be discussing, we're going to be, even though there won't be a full-on conversation during the actual speech, it is an inclusive statement to include the audience as well. Okay, it is less formal. You are talking to an audience. Those beautiful sentences you write in your papers will be almost impossible to try and say when you're speaking. So shorter, more declarative statements are also easier to do. We can also use, notice, first-person voice and contractions because it's a conversation, not a formal paper. Organizational patterns. Okay. There are chronological, spatial, topical, cause and effect, problem solution, problem cause solution, and parallelism. Now, problem, cause, solution, and problem, solution are in purple there because those are more suited for, in fact, those are suited generally for a persuasive speech. And since we're talking about for this assignment being related to your informative speech, that's why I separated those out. Now, look at these a little bit more. A chronological is arranged over time. Think it's a history of something or an order. Now, you might have some things and use this like in one of your points, but we'll talk about that in a second. Spatial is according to movements in space or directions. Think if you've ever assembled something and you're following directions, you need to do this step first, then this step, or if you're talking about things and to do that, that might be chronological. But in terms of how to set those things and arrange them could be that. If you're describing a location, describing your classroom, those kinds of things might be spatial. Topical is arranging by parts of the whole. This is probably the most common type of thing. This is a situation where you pick the areas or sub-areas within your topic and you pick them. So I might say, let's look at the history of vaccines, the effectiveness of vaccines, and something else. But what you're doing is in that history, that history point is topical overall, but within that point, you might be doing something kind of chronological as you talk about that. So cause and effect is arranging things by cause or origins of something, and then the outcome or effects or the results of those causes. Now, problem solution is usually something you do for a persuasive speech. You describe a problem, and then you propose a solution and try to convince us that your solution is the best option. Problem cause solution takes that a little further, where they describe the problem. Then here is the cause of the problem, because sometimes people don't quite understand what is actually causing the problem. And then I give a solution that addresses the cause, which will then, of course, solve the problem. And then parallelism uses a repetitive grammatical structure. This is kind of things that repeat, like if you were talking about something and you might say, even little things like first, second, third, or if you were looking at several causes of something, one cause, another cause, a third cause, those kinds of things would be important. And sort of that same type of language lets your audience know where you're at and that you're switching from one topic to the next. Then we need an attention getter. This is how we start our things off, okay? A statement or question that piques the audience interest in what you have to say. If this is at the very start of the speech, it gets them to focus and pay attention. If you start before you have their attention, they will miss information, including maybe how many points you have, what the topic is, what the order of things are. So if they get lost later, that's a problem if they miss that information. So we want to get their attention first and draw them into the topic and go from there. I've got some examples at the end. Okay, the thesis or topic statement or essential idea statement. This is a statement that contains or summarizes a speech's main points or ideas. It is much shorter, again, than your paper. It's not 2 to 3 sentences. It's a declarative statement. Today we're going to look at, it is inclusive. Again, as I said, we will be discussing. Even though it's not an actual discussion, it draws them in and says, hey, I'm talking to you. It's part of a conversation, and you are included in this. It is less formal. Notice, again, the first person voice, the contractions. I like to have people say, we will, as opposed to, I'm going to talk to you. And the reason behind that is when you say, I'm going to talk to you, that puts your audience in sort of I'm in a passive listening mode. And not as engaged mentally. Whereas you say the inclusive language like we will or let's look at, that sort of gets them into I need to pay attention. Okay. Again, this is a conversation, not a formal paper, so keep that always in mind. Okay. The demonstration of importance to the audience. Now that I got their attention, now that I've told them what we'll be talking about, now let's make sure they know why it's important to them. So this is a relationship or connection a speaker makes with the audience. It's important. Why do they need to know? Okay, why do they need to listen? So why is this important of importance to the audience? Relating to them, this idea of this is similar to their situations. If you were doing something on funding college, you could, of course, put in here that, hey, like all of you, I plan on attending college next year, and I don't want to go into a bunch of debt. So we're going to look at ways to do that. So that idea of talking about I'm like you and we're doing this, and this is why you need to listen, is clear to them. Okay. It also builds rapport with the audience, how that information might be useful now or in the near future. In that case of paying for college, it would be very useful to them even now or the near future. A credibility statement. This is why you are a knowledgeable and credible source for this information that you will be providing for them. Now, for the most part, you are doing what's called borrowed credibility. You've done research from credible sources, which that information that I'm now sharing with you is what gives me credibility. So explain, how do you know what you know about your topic? Okay, you did research at least. I've conducted research for this speech. Perhaps you've done it for other papers. Perhaps something you've been interested in for a long time. So anything like that talks about this, every one of you are going to have something that says, I've done research about my topic. But you also might have experience. Okay, have you done or experienced the things you'll be discussing? If you're talking about, for example, going back to the paying for college, if you've already looked into some of the examples and things that you're going to be talking about and sharing with them, that also gives you more credibility. Okay, so then we do the last thing here is a preview of the main points. Make this clear and easy to follow by doing some or all of the following. This is going to be, here are the main points of my speech. Most speeches have 3. Okay, you can do 2, you can do 4, you can do 5. They'll be shorter, but that's okay. Just realize by telling them we're going to be looking at scholarships, grants, and student loans. If those are my 3 funding points for paying for college, putting those things in there will let them know that we're talking about 3 points and what they are. This is really important. So first of all, I want to let them know the number of points. We're going to be looking at 3 areas, and those areas are for paying for college. And those areas are, scholarships, there are grants, and then we'll be looking at student loans. Okay. You could also include in there, under grants, possibly like student employment or student jobs could help pay for that. Okay. List them out. And do this in the order that you will be presenting them in your speech. So you're going to say the first thing, that's going to be your first main point. The next thing you list is going to be your second main point, and the third thing, and so on. Okay. And you can do ordinals or parallelism. Okay. First, second, third, first, next, and then finally we'll look at, you can do that. And you can do those things in the speech. These transitions we'll talk about a little bit later on. Or the effects of this and the effects of this, and then the effects of this, if we're talking all about effects of something. Okay. And so that preview of the main points is by putting this as the last part of the introduction, you've given them a roadmap for your speech. Okay. You've given them the number of points. You've given them the order of those main points. And this is helpful because if they start thinking about something and get lost, you don't want them lost. You want them paying attention. But if they do this, when you transition to the next point, they're much more likely to go, oh, I know where we're at again now because we're now at point number 2 or point number 3. Okay. And then finally, who said extra points? A transition statement. Okay. If you include this transition statement, which serves as a bridge between the introduction to the body of the speech, you will have a transition from the introduction to the body and from the body to the conclusion. But in this case, since I'm giving you this assignment, which is an introduction only, if you include this, it lets your audience know you're getting ready to get to the bulk of your speech. Okay. So within your speech, transitions serve as bridges between your main points or between main sections of the speech. Note in the speech, this might seem awkward because you're going to say something like, so let's get started with our first point, the history of vaccines. Only then you're not going to then start talking about the history of vaccines. You're going to be done. But if you do that, hey, I'm going to, you just be stopping there. It will seem a little awkward. Okay. These are very short. I've got some examples in here of different ones students have filled out over the years. This is one about Disney, Disney World versus Disneyland, for example. There's a topical pattern. They're going to talk about what do you think of, and they actually have some subpoints in their attention getter. We're looking at the history of Disney theme parks, what they have to offer. And then they go on to talk about their, in this case, notice I've done research, but they've, on this, but they also been to parks many times, and this student's family goes almost every year. And then the main points and a transition there. Okay. And it's very brief. Here's one then, on vaccines. And this one, again, is a topical one here. But notice as part of their credibility, a vaccinated individual and doing things. And then I thought I had one that said was going into nursing, but I must have got the wrong. A future nursing student. So that is, good information and a source of credibility as well. I think this is the last one. Attention getter. This one is about student behavior in classrooms. This was someone who's going to go on to become an early education major. And so they talk about these various things. You can see all those examples as well. I'll post this video as well as this slide set for you. If you have questions, please message me either in Canvas or email me, either one. Thanks.